if you've never seen the art of Remedios Varo, it is gonna blow your mind. Varo was a Mexican surrealist, and she made some of the most haunting and captivating paintings ever produced. Oh, and did I mention that her art foreshadows one of the most popular trends in today's movies and TV shows? Yeah, you might want to stick around for this one. These days, Remedios Varo is kind of having a moment. In recent years, both MoMA and the Boston Museum of Fine Arts acquired her work, and in 2020, one of her paintings fetched the second highest price ever paid at auction for a work of art by a female artist from Latin America. Now, a large part of this is that art historians are finally making the long overdue effort to study the work of women artists throughout history. But I think there's another reason that Remedios Varo speaks to the present day, which is that her work involves world building. Now, today we see world building everywhere in the cultural landscape, from video games to movies and TV. And it's not just the fictional universes that extend across media and tie together franchises, but even standalone works go out of their way to usher us into a fully realized alternate reality.
Think fast. Motor control's looking good.
And while yes, these fictional worlds create space for fan fiction and Easter eggs and merchandising, they also allow us to question the rules and desires that govern society. And that's exactly what Remedios Varo was after. So today we're going to take a look at the work of Remedios Varo through the lens of contemporary fictional world building. We're going to start with a brief overview of Remedios Varo's life and work, and then we're going to take a deep dive into the world she develops in her paintings, and how it anticipates many of the trends in today's most popular fictional universes. Remedios Varo was born in Spain in 1908. Her mother was a devout Catholic who sent the young Remedios to a Catholic boarding school, which Varo hated. When Varo was 16, her family moved to Madrid and she enrolled in the Real Academia de Bellas Artes de San Fernando, where she studied drawing and painting. Now, in 1930, Varo got married and moved to Barcelona. But in 1936, she left her husband to go fight against Franco in the Spanish Civil War, eventually fleeing to Paris with a poet named Benjamin Perret. Now, in Paris, something really big happened, which was that Perret introduced Varo to the Surrealists. Surrealism started out in the 1920s in Paris with artists like Salvador Dali and René Magritte and Max Ernst, and by the 1930s, it had become a pervasive cultural force that influenced art and literature, even film. Now, the Surrealists were all about accessing a level of reality above what we normally experience as the real world. They read Freud and Carl Jung, and they were fascinated with the world of dreams and symbols.
I'm glad you didn't dream of me as an egg beater, as one of my patients did.
Why, what would that mean?
Never mind.
Now, for Remedios Varo, with her conservative upbringing, surrealism was just what she needed, a radically different view of the world that inspired her to unleash her imagination and explore her artistic voice. However, Varo would not reach her full artistic potential in Paris, perhaps because, like a lot of women, she was never really fully accepted by the Surrealists. Oh, you thought the male-dominated 1920s art movement obsessed with Freud had a balanced view of women and men as intellectual equals?
Textbook case of female hysteria.
Now, in 1940, the Nazis invaded Paris, and Varo and Perret fled to Mexico City. And there, Varo found a community of expatriate artists, people like Leonora Carrington and the photographer Cati Horna. And with their support, her art career began to flourish. Working in Mexico City from 1942 until her untimely death in 1963, Varo produced nearly 200 paintings. And by that time, Varo had developed a highly personal style that took the visual language of surrealism and bent it to her own cosmic vision. But the effect of this style was even more remarkable. Remedios Varo had created a world. Now, as far as I know, Remedios Varo never came out and defined the world of her paintings as a contiguous fictional space. But this is how scholars talk about her work, and looking at the visual evidence, there are certainly enough common elements to suggest what we might today call a fictional universe. Now, to create a fictional world, you need a consistent use of distinctive spaces, character types, and physical processes. So for example, if you look at the Star Wars universe, you have consistent settings like Imperial starships or planets that are dominated by a single biome. There are common character types like stormtroopers and Jedi Knights, and physical processes like the Force and hyperspace travel.
What happened? Where are they? I don't know, sir. They must have hyperjets on that thing. And what do we got on this thing? A Cuisinart?
Turning to the work of Remedios Varo, we see the same consistency of setting, character, and process. Most of Varo's paintings take place in architectural spaces with narrow alleys, brick-lined streets, clean, flat walls, and rounded archways. And a lot of times there are turrets or towers, which give things a vaguely medieval feel. The other main space in Varo's work is a kind of dark forest, and sometimes Varo even combines the two, imbuing the forest with a Gothic architectural structure. And finally, a lot of the spaces and objects in Remedios Varo's paintings have distinctive textures, which she created using techniques that she picked up from the Surrealists, things like fumage, which uses smoke, and especially decalcomania, where you use aluminum foil to kind of smush paint against a surface to create a pattern. Now, wandering through the hushed streets and dark woods of Remedios Varo's paintings is an idiosyncratic cast of characters. Her figures are thin and placid, men and women with sunken eyes and long, angular faces, and there are also androgynous beings with heart-shaped faces and almond eyes that some scholars have suggested are modeled on Varo herself. And in addition, there's a whole menagerie of fantastic creatures: rooster dogs and fern cats, bird people, boat people, bat people.
It's a push me, pull you. Look. Holy O'Reilly.
But in my opinion, the coolest part of Remedios Varo's world are all of the magical and mystical things that actually happen in her paintings. Figures are always tinkering in mad scientist laboratories, coming up with wild creations, and people move through Varo's world using all sorts of whimsical contraptions: shoes with wheels and coats that become boats, and mustaches with actual handlebars. And there's also an emphasis on radical transformation. Figures morph into and out of walls, people become objects, and objects come to life. Fabric becomes rigid, turning into a chair or a bicycle or whatever the occasion calls for. But what's even more interesting than Remedios Varo's world itself is all the different sources she drew upon to create it. So first of all, Remedios Varo took a lot from the art of the Renaissance. The clean piazzas and round arches recall painters like Fra Angelico. The fantastic creatures seem like they're right out of Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. And the Renaissance penchant for expressive drapery influenced the animated fabrics in Varo's work. The Surrealists also left their mark on Remedios Varo's art. Varo used Surrealist techniques like decalcomania, and the quiet streets in her paintings remind me of the quiet arcades in De Chirico. And finally, Varo drew on mysticism and the occult to complete her world. You can see her interest in alchemy and all the extensive laboratories and the transformations of matter, and Varo painted witches and figures from the tarot like the hermit and the juggler. However, for as much as we might marvel at all the whimsy of Remedios Varo's work, there's still the question of what ideas Varo was trying to explore. And this is a question that scholars have debated since Varo's death. And while I don't know if I have the ultimate solution, I think we can learn a lot about Remedios Varo's world by comparing it with its contemporary equivalents, the fictional universes of today's sci-fi and fantasy movies. Now, when you actually get into it, it's pretty surprising just how many similarities there are between the world of Remedios Varo's paintings and today's sci-fi and fantasy worlds. Varo's whimsical contraptions look like they could be right out of a Tim Burton movie. The narrow medieval streets in Varo's paintings bring back memories of King's Landing. And Varo's fantastic beasts recall, well, Fantastic Beasts. But what's really interesting is the way that Varo's work tackles so many of the issues that contemporary fictional worlds explore. So, for example, a series of 3 paintings from the early 1960s shows a group of girls at a convent school. And in the first 2 paintings, there are these dark skies and scenes of conformity and forced labor. Then in the final scene, titled The Escape, one of the girls has broken free, and this painting is all swirling motion and bright, fiery orange. Taken together, these paintings have been interpreted as a critique critique of organized religion, particularly Varro's constraining experience as a child at a convent school and her ultimate liberation through art. Now, these kinds of critiques of authority show up all the time in today's sci-fi worlds. With its fundamentalist dystopia of Gilead, The Handmaid's Tale presents a similarly scathing look at the oppressive and menacing conformity of religious societies, and more generally, religions and governments are often shown as brutal and dictatorial in sci-fi and fantasy worlds.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Now, another common theme in Varro's work is the inclusion of female protagonists. In Varro's paintings, women are explorers and scientists, summoners and mystics. And by featuring androgynous figures, Varro was undercutting the culturally constructed gender roles that she worked against her whole life. From eschewing the role of wife and mother and going to fight in the Spanish Civil War, to refusing to be a mere erotic object for the Surrealists. Varro's world is one where women drive the narrative and traditional gender roles do not apply. And this is a big part of a lot of contemporary sci-fi and fantasy. I mean, many movies and TV shows are led by female protagonists, from Rey and Katniss to Arya and Ripley. And lots of sci-fi movies feature genderless androids that take on some historically gendered tasks, like housework and warfare, dissociating gender from its traditional societal functions. And finally, many of Varro's paintings present a mystical, harmonious relationship between humans and nature. Tree spirits accompany a troubadour gliding through the woods. A person nourishes the moon by feeding it cosmic energy. And this cosmic connection between humans and nature is found in a lot of today's sci-fi movies, nowhere more clearly than on the planet Pandora in the film Avatar. In Avatar, the connection the Na'vi have with Pandora is contrasted with the violent resource extraction of the humans, and this is often taken as a pro-environmentalist message. And while I'm not sure Varro's world is about environmentalism or climate change per se, I think it does suggest that we approach nature with a sense of reverence for our place within the larger cosmic order. Now, I should mention that Remedios Varo was not the only artist to engage in world building. De Chirico's empty piazzas come to mind, as do Piranesi's imaginary prisons, even Claude Lorrain's fanciful harbors. Though, to my mind, Remedios Varo took world building much further than any of these. And some of the points of overlap between Varro's work and contemporary science fiction are probably correlated to broader histories. I mean, artists have been creating imaginary beasts since time immemorial, and critiques of organized religion are as old as organized religion itself. But in other ways, it does feel like Varro was ahead of her time. She built a fully realized visual fictional world well before the internet and streaming TV made these kinds of worlds staples of our culture. She envisioned a harmonious relationship between humanity and the forces of nature long before climate change made that relationship more important than ever. And she created new myths about powerful women, anticipating a long overdue trend we're just beginning to see blossom in our culture. So when I look at the soaring auction prices for Remedios Varo's work, and I see big museums snapping up her best pieces, I can't help but smile, because it means that the world has finally caught up with Remedios Varo. Now the only question is, how can I grow a beard that doubles as a mode of transportation?